Welcome to the Unsung Podcast. We're back. It feels like we've been away for ages.
Speak for yourself, man. I've been editing all week. Honestly, yesterday was about 75% just you two guys talking. So, yeah,
sorry about that.
No, it doesn't feel like time away for me.
I am joined by two of the human highlight reels.
I am MF Chump.
I am... Oh, shit, I don't know.
MDMF.
Yeah, I am B&Q. MDMF. MFI.
Gotwood. Yeah, quite a week. Quite a week
Indeed.
Did you have any money on something atrocious going down at the inauguration?
I didn't actually. I should have put something on.
Well, no, you shouldn't, because nothing happened.
I know nothing happened, but I mean, given the atmosphere beforehand, it would have been a safe bet. I think Oz would have been okay on something happening, even though nothing did happen in the end.
Exactly, it wasn't a safe bet. So this is... I thought you were a gambling man.
That's what I'm saying. I think the odds would have been quite decent until the actual day off.
Is this our first non-Trump podcast?
It is.
It is.
That's some buzz, isn't it?
Will Unsung Podcast even work in the post-Trump era?
Boris Johnson.
As we all know, the Democratic Party is perfect. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are exceptionally progressive economically and socially, and basically everything is solved and racism is over.
See, this is the point where we stop making big grandstand mic drop proclamations because Trump's done something insane and just start haggling over the minutiae. But I actually think they're alright. And I'm much further to the left than them, but I'm just so fucking glad to have somebody that I don't feel is about to fall asleep face down on the nuclear button at any moment. And yeah, I'm good with that.
No, you are right. It's like we now have somebody who is...
I think the phrase a decent human being is fairly relevant. You know, I mean, we can say what we want about politics and politicians and duplicitousness, and yeah, I know they come out with a lot of shit, especially in America. I mean, you still can't go over the amount of pomp and nonsense and how the fuck do they take that flag-waving bullshit so seriously. Garth Brooks singing that song, and I mean, they're really like, it's so absurd, I think, to especially Scottish people, to watch what Americans get up to when they're talking about their country. But even then, I do think this crew are at least... I mean, did you see that they did did you see the presidential briefing? It was normal. It was like a woman that could speak in full sentences, saying things that didn't make you just fall off your fucking seat. It was so tedious. I loved it. It was just completely functional and informative stuff I didn't care about, really.
Well, the fact is, like, we are going back to boring politics, hopefully. Well, at least in America. And
yeah,
like, politics was always supposed to be boring. It always was boring when
that's kind of the ideal scenario, when you're just whittling down little details. You're not like deciding whether or not you're going to wipe out Iran. That's
it's supposed to be just administration, basically, and making sure everything works and that everybody gets paid and fed on time.
As my friend Callum said to me yesterday, give it 2 years and Biden will be drilling into his soup, and fucking Biden and Trump will have declared the 1,000-year Reich.
See, that's optimistic.
It's interesting. See, you could say that about Rupert Murdoch, but he's doing okay at his age, and there's certainly plenty.
But Biden's certainly sundowning, though. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I mean, he's slower than S-band. Could you do what Biden does? I bet you fucking couldn't, man. I bet you couldn't have given that fucking speech.
I would not have thought about doing it, though. So I guess that's what the difference is.
I mean, it is an unbelievable amount of pressure, and the guy fully conceded that he didn't want to do this. It was literally only after Charlottesville that he was like, I'm going to run, and if it takes me being a moderate and using my connections to different communities to get this guy out of office, then it's triage. It's like, that's what it's got to be. And I mean, Kamala Harris is president. I'm fine with that, man. She's good.
I have no problem with that either.
Yeah. So yeah, to hell with it. It's interesting, but I don't think... Yeah, I definitely don't think it's over. You've got your kind of Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi when all the Muppets arrive. So, yeah. Lo and behold, though, we decided to do an episode. We changed tack, as we mentioned in the previous show, and we were going to do a different hip-hop... Is it hip-hop? Yeah. Different hip-hop record. And we're going to do this one instead in honour of MF Doom.
come to cut the mix master. ICE Cole, nice to be old. Y2G Steve twice to threefold. He sold scrolls, lo and behold. Know who's the illest ever, like the greatest story told. Keep your glory, gold and glitter. For half.
Mark, this is your choice. Over to you. I'm going to get my Game Boy on mute. If you need me for anything, just wave and I'll try and keep the corner of my eye on the screen.
Well, it was kind of. Well, it was my choice, but me and Dave kind of conferred on it, right? We did decide this was probably the best one to go for. So I've decided to do Madvillainy by Madvillain, which is one of MF Doom's collaborative projects. This episode is mostly going to be focusing on Doom, obviously, but this is MF Doom and Madlib.
Quaz, when he really hits star mode, never will he boost loose Phillies with the barcode, or take a whole carload on a wasted trip, or sit wide out laces.
As a so far only album they've done together, and widely regarded as being one of the most important hip hop albums of all time. And I'm just going to put it out there before we even begin. In the week after Doom died, this album went silver in the UK.
Did it? I didn't realise that.
Yeah, it's mental.
Well, yeah, so I guess the starting point is that we're doing this because MF Doom, or his death was announced on New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little text from you, Mark, while I was DJing at home to my friends. And I was like, oh, that's MF Doom, sad face. But it was kind of a weird one because it turned out he died 2 months prior, and it
on
only
Halloween
just been announced. Yeah,
that's pretty badass.
It's very Doom.
Yeah, it kind of suits him.
Yeah. So we've decided to do this episode on his extensive discography, but I'm going to put this out there now and just say that it's probably worth saying, and we're not going to be covering all of his discography. He's done a lot of collab records. We'll cover all of the Doom albums, I guess, the Viktor Vaughn ones, the King Geedorah ones, some of the collab albums, but none of the 10 instrumental albums that he did over the course of like 5 years at the start of 2000s. And they are great, and if you like what you listen, if you like what you hear here and you haven't listened to them before, I'd recommend checking them out. There's actually a great compilation on Spotify, so we won't be touching them. And he's done a whole bunch of fucking guest spots and tracks, which I guess, I don't know about you, Dave, I'll cover a couple of them, but I've not really went into too much depth on those either. But it certainly keep them to the core Doom stuff, I would say, and personas, which is a big important thing in his kind of career.
And probably just talk about his influence as well, his background. He genuinely is a bit of an absolute fucking legend, and I think we probably would have come to him at some point anyway had it not been for his passing.
Yeah.
Can I throw in one of the very few things I know? Your favourite rapper's favourite rapper?
And that for me, and that's definitely true. My favourite rapper is this guy was a favourite rapper. So
yeah, so and he is probably his own favourite rapper. So
yeah, so let's begin then. MF Doom, or Doom, which he was kind of known as in his later career because he felt MF Doom was too formal, was born Daniel Dumile in July 1971. He was born in London,
which is mad. I had no idea.
Yeah. His family,
he never got American citizenship. His family moved to New York, Long Island, New York, when he was a child. His dad was a school teacher and his mum was a nurse. And even though none of them dad was Zimbabwean, his mum was Trinidadian.
Yeah. And even though him or his family had no affiliation with Britain, like you say, Chris, he never ever gained American citizenship, and actually was denied entry into the US after a European tour in 2009, and lived in London from then onwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I know that pretty early on, was it like May of like 91, him and his collaborator Onyx.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
They testified before a Senate committee on a voter registration bill, but surely Dumile wasn't actually eligible to vote then?
Well, you would have thought at that point in his life he would have applied. He would have been eligible to gain naturalised like citizenship in the US, but for some reason he just never ever claimed it. I don't know if it's partly because of the religion thing. You know, he was brought up a black Muslim, and his family were part of that, and you know, the early KMD stuff is quite reflective of that the circles they moved in, and all that, and a lot of his early music and stuff was kind of really influenced by growing up as a black Muslim in New York.
At least he probably died thinking he'd made the right decision.
Yeah, well, after he get denied entry for the US. He said, I'm done with the UK, and then he spent 2 years waiting.
Done with the UK?
Done with the US, sorry. And then he spent 2 years waiting for his wife and child to come over to be with him in London, but then he obviously lived out the rest of his days there.
Aye, because fucking Britain's cracking right now, eh?
Yeah.
we've got it all sorted.
So he was kind of a geeky, well actually I say kind of a geeky kid, he was a total fucking geek growing up. There's an interview from 2003 which you can find on the Ambrosia for Heads website, which talks about how he was really big into comics and video games as well as music, and that plays a huge part throughout his entire career. Obviously the comics thing is hugely pertinent because of the Doom moniker and all the various different personas that he has. He initially began DJing at parties, which is how he kind of get into production and beat making and all that. He started off by mixing hip hop songs into kind of what he calls slow songs, so I guess R&B jams and all that, and that kind of got him hooked on production and making beats. In 1988 he formed KMD.
And yeah, can he get the job done with Joe? I take care of business. What's up with this peaceful nonsense? Peaceful. What are y'all talking about, this peaceful? That's one thing to say. Man, by the hands of my chinny chin chin, sets black hairs, string by string.
Causing much damage with his brother, DJ Subrock, and another DJ called MC Rodan, who then left and was replaced.
Also, can we just say, also a Godzilla villain?
Yes.
Rodan.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is a bunch of geeks, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
It's cute, but it's a bunch of geeks.
He went by the name Zev Love X, which I guess was his first moniker. And he, like I said, they used the experience of coming from a black Muslim family as the inspiration for that album. They began as a graffiti crew that also liked to dabble in breakdancing. But that's pretty crucial because that whole graffiti vibe is in pretty much all of his artwork. And every kind of merch item that he does. So it was clearly very, obviously quite foundational for him as an influence. Growing up, his early aesthetic was clearly defined by that.
It's kind of nice that a fairly killer bit of MF Doom graffiti sprung up just after his death was announced in Glasgow.
They've added another one since as well, right next to it, yeah, on the wall.
Yeah,
right
and that was, God, I only saw that like on January like the 5th or something, so it was within like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, it must have gone straight up. It's
big,
really
huge
nice
piece next to the Clyde. It's really cool.
Yeah, you can see it from right across the river. That's cool. Really eye-catching.
They met a guy called MC Search at a community event from the hip hop duo Third Base, and then they appeared on a song of theirs called The Gas Face, which then led to them getting signed to Elektra Records, which is the first and only major record deal that Doom had ever had. They released their first album, Mr. Hood, in 1991.
It's interesting going back and listening to the KMD stuff. Obviously, I'm a little bit what's the word? I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here, but it definitely has a distinctly different feel, that kind of like 90s stuff. It's a bit more like accessible and less aggressive and
Like sticks in the mud. Ibuprofen from Newports keep me from flipping daily. Yet I constantly slip into thinking kinda loony. In my logo, you see us? Whoever said that cool was me.
you know, it's got fewer edges on it, and you can hear why it might have been seen as being quite palatable. I watched a couple of videos of people that were big fans going through his catalogue, but talking quite fondly of the early stuff, saying, you know, what I'm sure you're about to tell us, if that hadn't transpired, like, it is a band that could have gone on to do something. They had some chops.
Yeah, you know, like kind of in the late 80s, early 90s, the hip-hop sound kind of bifurcated, right? You kind of had this sort of boom-bap sound, which was very influenced by some of the kind of Run DMC style hip-hop that was kind of kicking around in the late 80s, and that then influenced things like De La Soul and A Tribe Called Quest, and you can hear that in KMD.
Comes the being plugged one, it's just me, myself, and I. It's just me, myself, and I.
And then the Bomb Squad coming out of Public Enemy and all that kind of went on to influence NWA and sort of gangster rap, you know. So you can those two completely different styles of hip-hop production that kind of sprang up at that point. And yeah, he was kind of more on the, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? You could easily see it's been more commercialised than...
It's far less aggressive.
Yeah. I think Mr. Hood's an okay album. It's quite imperfect, but right away, like, you can see the production stuff is shining through. Not just in that, but obviously throughout his career, it's a huge thing. But he always seemed to hang on to the 90s hip hop vibe, and you can see it begins here. Did you guys dabble with this album? Did you have any highlights on it?
I mean, this is the sort of hip hop that I never really got into. I was never into that sort of De La Soul thing. Maybe just because it's too sort of flappy and happy for me. But it's an interesting record, and the production is really cool. Like, just that, the mix of like the funk and the jazz and the sort of childish stuff is cool. And I like having that sort of recurring character as well is interesting from a sort of narrative perspective. But yeah, I mean, this sort of hip hop leaves me fairly cold.
Yeah. See, the idea for the samples and all that was actually his brother who thought that up. They used to take VHS cassette tapes and then just like copy the samples off them, or copy samples from them and insert them into songs and stuff like that. I think Figure of Speech is a pretty good song. It's got that nice kind of 80s boom bap Run DMC kind of vibe with Doom's quite chill flow.
Could stay away from stiff hood, so does Riff. Productions write up songs quite clever, but light up a torch pipe, Riff will never. I'm no snuffhead, I prefer headsets. Decided enough said for head sweats, X this figure of speech.
Nitty Gritty's a bit more aggressive. It feels a bit more like Public Enemy. And then the single, which was kind of the one that started to give them a little bit of recognition, was Peach Fuzz, which is cool. You can kind of see the direction that we're going to go on with our next album on a song called Who Me, which is quite pivotal for them. You can see like it kind of talks about the actual experience of being a black man in America, growing up, and he talks about himself as like a villain because of the colour of his skin. The thought process of being a villain, you know, they kind of see it in his head from a very young age, that he was kind of thinking about duality in his music, you know, and his persona, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess he's just like early 20s at this point.
Mm-hmm. And then tragedy struck not long afterwards, so they kind of went away to record their next album called Black Bastards, and before they could finish it, his brother got hit by a car when crossing an expressway in Long Island in 1993, and Onyx left the group, so he was kind of left himself to finish it. And then
am I not right in that same week they were dropped? Or
so
they were cancelled?
He turned it into Elektra, and he done the album art for himself, which is a picture of Sambo being hanged.
Yeah. So I like that. Dodgy words, but it's the kind of Pickaninny being lynched, old kind of southern racist trope cartoon.
Totally.
And Elektra were not impressed.
Yeah, it was mostly because there was a lot of fear around hip hop at the time, because Cop Killer by Body Count had just come out the year before, and every record label was getting squeaky bums, especially if they were that big a label like Elektra. So they just dropped the band, gave them his masters, gave him $20,000, and basically told him to fuck off.
It's a year after the riots, right?
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, but it's interesting that it's like, you know, like Cop Killer is about being at war with, you know, the police, and whereas this is just, you know, showing that you're a victim here.
Yeah, you know, there's something about it doesn't tally for me in that sense. You know, the manner of the dismissal from Elektra. I mean, the timing is incredibly crass. I mean, okay, Elektra don't have to keep a guy on their label because his brother just died, but it's a really, if the kind of common telling of the story, and it was as recent, you know, it was as close as like a week or so, it's really brutal. And I think when you look, okay, you can understand them being unhappy with the combination of the album art and the name, but they wouldn't be the first band in the world that's tried to release, you know, Smell the Glove. You know, it wouldn't, you know, it's quite a trope that bands chance their arm and then the label says to them, you need to fucking change it. It's odd that the whole thing was just scrapped and abandoned, and that something just, my instincts, you know, I've got like, well, we're maybe going to use loads of comic book analogies. My spidey sense is tingling on that one, man. There's something just doesn't feel entirely right, and I mean from the perspective of, I think they kind of got fucked somehow. I don't know if maybe the label said, this project's got no future in it, we're not putting money into it, this boy's dead, this guy's not settled in the group, like, we're not taking this financial risk, and they saw an out and made a fairly ruthless call. There's something just doesn't feel right about it, you know what I mean? Like when you see that telling of it. I think though, the most interesting thing that I read of as a consequence of that, and I mean, you're talking about him casting himself as a villain because of the colour of his skin and that, and I mean, I guess that could well be true, and you know, maybe there's some basis for that. I think what was really, really interesting were some like choice quotes from Doom himself, saying things like talking about plotting revenge on the music industry. Phrases like he said he was recovering from wounds, and I think at that point, you know, because he ended up homeless basically. I mean, he was like sleeping on benches, and he moved to Atlanta to try and get over all this stuff. I mean, I think this guy was deeply wounded by the way this went down, and that feels consistent with what my instincts are telling me about the way they were dropped. From that point on, he seems like that kind of damaged goods guy who's like, I am going to fuck these guys however I can. And actually, like, this is the one thing that when I was reading about the guy's history, where the various little odd details started to all come together, things that we'll talk about later, like him not turning up for shows, sending people in his stead. I think that's an interesting reflection on where this villain character came from, because he was like out for revenge. Like, they fucking ruined his life at this point. They left him hanging. He'd just lost his brother in a tragic accident. He'd lost everything he'd been working towards. It reminded me, again, comic book analogies, it reminded me a bit of two characters, both Mr. Freeze and Two-Face from Batman. Both of whom were ostensibly good guys. Mr. Freeze, I believe, if I remember rightly, was trying to save his terminally ill wife. And Two-Face, obviously Harvey Dent, lawyer fighting the crime families, and falls victim to the very thing that he's trying to fight against. And then, you know, these guys were broken by the misfortune of their circumstances, and that's how they became villains. And they were never true villains. They were almost like anti-villains. You know, in the same way you get anti-heroes, they were like anti-villains. Villains that you don't particularly hate because they have a compelling reason for the things that they do. And it's quite Shakespearean, actually. It's you know, there's a lot of that in a lot of the classic Shakespearean figures, people that are driven to madness and sort of nefarious deeds by misfortune. That's actually quite relatable. And I think that telling of Doom is much more compelling than some of the other chat about why you like the villain characters and stuff. I think this guy,
he was driven, absolutely driven.
He had an understandable grudge against an industry that fucked him in just the most crass way at his lowest point in his life. And I think that to me really was what I took away from that. And I found it a really fascinating telling of that story.
Well, I'm just going to say, like, I'm going to go through, as Chris said, like, your favourite rapper's favourite rapper, like quotes by big rappers about him. But one like that is JPEG Mafia, who said, I looked up to MF Doom in particular. He left the industry and came back like revenge, almost like revenge shit after tragedy, like he was an anti-hero, and that totally inspired me. And that is exactly it. And then even the way that he ended up, you know, fucking with the industry, that's completely what folk like Death Grips and stuff like that do as well, to just put their finger up at an industry that is happy to put people through the grinder.
And in some of their cases it's maybe more ideological, whereas in Doom's case it seems more personal.
It's absolutely personal. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's definitely backed up by what he said in some interviews that I kind of listened to and read. There's a cool interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates, who did, I think he did it for the New Yorker when Doom was recording Born Like This. He talks to some of his collaborators or early friends like Prince Paul and all that, and he says that Doom just seemed to completely vanish. Nobody heard from him, nobody saw him, and also it's kind of like nobody was asking for him either. It was almost as if he'd kind of become a bit toxic himself for some reason, and nobody was asking for this. Maybe I don't think, to be honest, the first two albums, like the only two albums by KMD rather, they're fine, but they don't really earmark him as being a standout talent that people are going to go asking over. You know what I mean?
I mean, it is important though to acknowledge that Doom didn't disappear. Daniel Dumile, or like at the very most, Zen Love X disappeared, and MF Doom is what came back instead. That's what I was going to get into. That's very comic book in its own way as well, where it takes you a while to even realise, who is this guy? Holy fuck, that's that guy from...
Yeah, I mean, even going from supporting character to main character, it's Bruce Wayne going away and then Batman coming back.
Yeah, because Dumile said that in an interview, with that AFH interview I said earlier on. One of the things he particularly identified with Dr. Doom and of himself as a character, because no matter what the Fantastic Four did to think that they'd killed him, he'd always come back, and he loved that. Viktor Von Doom only ever wanted to serve his people and do what he could for the country that he ruled, and he would do anything for that country, including tussling with the heroes if they ever got in his way. But ultimately it was all about doing what he felt was best for the people that he loved, and he liked that duality of still trying to get one up over the people that think they're more powerful. It's obviously a bit of an allegory for, well, Doom is a bit of an allegory for sort of socialism versus capitalism and the American way and all that. But he realised after KMD was gone and he stopped making music that if he was ever going to come back, he said, I'm going to have to come back as a character. He was sitting around listening to the jazz on the radio one day, and he realised that he had to completely become somebody else. The major label would let him down. He was broke as fuck, he was homeless, he lost everything. And hip hop was also changing in a way that he just didn't like. It was becoming so focused on image and lots of label mechanics he just didn't agree with. And he was fuck it, I'm coming back, and I'm coming back as nobody, really,
See, before we get too far from it, I'd like to just put a pin in that comment you made about capitalism and communism. But yeah, what you're saying about him, even tonally, I noticed, and this is one of the useful things about me and my lack of involvement in hip hop and rap and that whole world of music is that I can at least shed a sort of fairly objective perspective, a fairly objective light on some of these subjects. And it's fascinating how lyrically he had so little in common with his peers when he came back, because as you say, the scene had moved in this direction that we know what it became over the next 5 years, and the sort of subject matter that it just absolutely orbited, and he never really subscribed to that. And just in that one sense, he's an outlier. He'd clearly not been building as part of that. He hadn't, all these things hadn't stuck to him. He'd been developing out with that scene, and therefore the product that arrived didn't have all the artifacts of other people's sort of consensus of where hip hop was going and what it took to make it. And that's quite fascinating as well.
Yeah, it's quite punk rock in a way, isn't it? Like the way that he would approach that. He said in an interview with Red Bull Music Academy in 2011 that he always sees Doom, that particular character of Doom himself, as a sort of nasty guy with a heart of gold who's driven mad by the things that he loves, and he hates seeing it being destroyed by the forces that he kind of once tussled with but also abhors at the same time. I
put a pin in that as well, man.
Which I think, he loves hip hop, but he sees it being destroyed by all this imagery and fake bullshit, and you could see that he was never really going to be somebody that was going to be hanging around with, like you said, many of the people that were dragging the whole thing in another direction, which was quite different from the quote-unquote more pure feeling that it had back in the early 90s.
He's definitely not a 50 Cent guy, is he?
Yeah, totally. And he's going to take revenge against, and I quote, the industry that deformed him, as he said.
Yeah, that's one of the other pivotal quotes from around about that time where he was talking about recovering from wounds and things as well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he fucks off for a few years. He starts turning up open nights with women's tights over his head, like completely masking his face. Then he starts wearing Halloween masks that are spray painted silver.
That would get you all kinds of fucking cancelled in Glasgow these days.
Yeah, totally. But then he kind of wrote this album, Operation Doomsday.
Hold your insulting tongue and mark my words well. I have plotted my revenge on you. Now I shall have it. Bid farewell to your friends. Doom hates us all, but in his warped mind he has a...
One of the things that he kind of spoke about as well is when he was kind of looking over the scene and how rappers were operating, and it kind of comes back to something you touched on there, Chris, is he actually took rhyming all the way back to when he used to just do it at school for fun and write notebooks, just to pull words together and the way that they sound and their assonance or consonants, you know what I mean, the way that there's internal rhymes and the way that rhyme structure works. And nobody was really doing that in the mainstream anyway. There was obviously some alternative contemporaries of his that were doing it, Madlib of course being one of them, and J Dilla and everybody that was orbiting him too, but he was dead set in carving his own path, and Operation Doomsday is basically a mission statement, straight from the get-go.
Stay in the zone, turn H2O to cognac on Doomsday. Ever since the womb till I'm back where my brother went, that's what my tumor say. Right above my government Dumile, either unmarked or engraved, hey, who's to say? I wrote this one in BCDC O section.
And one that's quite revered, I noticed, because, as part of my due diligence here, man, I went and collated some of the kind of best of retrospective lists, and Operation Doomsday was second in the majority of them, with Madvillainy being first. Obviously, Food, which we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure, was the only one that occasionally swapped places with Operation Doomsday for third. The rest were all well behind. The rest, there was no real consensus on their placing. But this top three was the same everywhere I looked.
It's a really good album, man. I like this album a lot. Doomsday, the song Doomsday is a total fucking jam. It samples Shadi, and it totally works. You know?
There's a whole mashup album of MF Doom and Shadi.
In a hurry, just be cute and don't worry. Time to make a nigga hallucinate and admit it. Then she started losing weight, letting everybody hit it.
Really?
It's called Shadi Villain. It's fucking brilliant. It's really, really good.
He sounds really energised and old school on it, which I guess would have made him stand out straight away amongst the pack in 1999 when it came out. Rhymes Like Dimes is also a total classic.
I sell rhymes like dimes, the one who mostly keep cash but brag about the broker time. Joker rhymes like the is you just happy to see me trick. Classical slapstick rappers need chapstick. A lot of them sound like they in a talent show, so I give them something to remember like the Alamo. Tally ho or hot.
It kind of talks about what he references back. What he spoke about when he was growing up. You know, like 80s hip hop, like alongside slow songs. You know, kind of it's a Quincy Jones sample in that song. Funnily enough. You can totally see how many people bumped his style from this album straight away. That neo soul and jazz meets hip hop thing was so fucking influential, and it still is to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's loads of early 90s R&B and like New Jack Swing sort of samples and feel to it. Yeah, and like Red and Gold and The Finest as well. You really get that. And I think this is a great record.
I thought TikTok was good as well. That's got MF Grimm on it, and we don't really have time to go into MF Grimm because his story itself is also fucking fascinating. But yeah, they fell out and shit, and he ended up doing like diss tracks against him and stuff, and it was just quite embarrassing for Grimm. But yeah, he worked with him quite a lot in the early days. After this album came out, he becomes really fucking prolific. In the next 6 years, he releases 17 albums, all under various names.
That's fucking Frank Zappa-esque.
Totally is, yeah. So I want to take a second to kind of talk a little bit about his characters, if you'll indulge me, because there are a few.
Be indulged.
So Metal Fingers is what he used for all the instrumental stuff he did. That's kind of what he calls himself as a producer. The MF and MF Doom means Metal Fingers. And all the Special Herbs albums, which are all the instrumental ones, are under that name.
The biggest and boldest robbery in the history of New York, and a one-man job at that. So, you know who I am. Tell me, how did you figure it out? If you would permit me a moment to light my pipe, it might come clearer to you.
MF Doom, or Doom, is kind of his main one. Or whenever he was asked about it, he would always say, "This is who I am for now." And
stylized in capitals,
stylized in all caps. Yeah, he reminds you on Madvillainy. It's all caps. But this is the old school hip hop dude. And there's actually a really good bit of character work on Madvillainy, which we'll talk about when we come to the album, about this character. He's an old school hip hop guy. He's in his 40s, which is obviously much older than Doom was at the time. His voice,
although not that much older. We'll get into it, and he is like 32, I think, and he does mention that he is older compared to contemporaries, coming out with early records.
Yeah, people might have noticed that his voice has changed a wee bit, or quite a lot actually, since KMD in this, is because apparently he smoked a total power of weed and his voice just got deeper.
Is that what I have to do then?
Yeah, I think so.
It's Tom Waits' method.
Both MF Doom is both lyricist and MC and producer in this guy, so he's all three things. The comic influence is clearly it's most apparent throughout this character. He used to love how Marvel comics would take characters' personalities and frame them and shape their motives in lots of different and interesting ways, even if they're the good guy or the bad guy, and he kind of leans into that a lot in his music. He said that learning that when he was growing up was something that was quite revelatory to him. He realised that positive and negative can exist in the same person, and it seems like that's kind of what helped him through that tragedy and kind of helped define the creation of Doom, the character, like we kind of spoke about earlier on. There's King Geedorah, who is kind of
another Godzilla villain.
He's a three-headed monster from space who views Earth from afar, and he actually said in an interview that Doom gets his instructions from Geedorah. He only really used this when he did the Monster Island SARS album.
SARS,
yeah. And then he's done it. He kind of pops in every now and again, and including on one album called "Take Me to Your Leader."
While simultaneously saving the streets, bombing and calming the savage with above average beats. Get the cabbage in the most lavish sweets. Consummate marriages in between the middle of sheets. Provider of the middle eats. Try to be the illest dad a kid or meet.
and I think it's really good. He's only on 4 tracks on it, rapping. He does all the production. But the cool thing about that record is all the characters that are on it, all the other rappers, kind of talk about how they're trembling in fear from Geedorah. And this is a stylistic leap for him. Sonically as a producer, his style really advances on the album. The beats are smoother, and when he does jump in as an MC, it's a lot more at ease. It's also louder and more energetic sounding, which I quite liked as well. Worth checking out just to see the other side of his persona.
It's quite a weird album to get into, but definitely worth it. Definitely worth a couple of listens.
Yeah, the song Phaser's really good. The first one, it's got a kind of smooth orchestral sort of R&B soul sample, and then some Godzilla samples, which kind of make up the bulk of it. Also like a song called Fastlane, which has got this really cool repeating guitar loop in it, which he doesn't really do hooks very often, but that's kind of hooky, and it feels dead apocalyptic as well.
Destination top, the cash game. See, keep like a missile with mad aim. You can't blame in this conspiracy campaign. A mystery the most. Universal host. Is hot, yup, more often than not. Vision clear like a Hindu with the third eye dot.
Yeah, but a lot of Godzilla samples on that album, as you'd imagine, because of the name of the character. And then the next one after that, which is an album that came out the same year, which is Viktor Vaughn, which is a play on Victor Von Doom, or the real name of the character, Dr. Doom from the Fantastic Four and other Marvel stuff. He says that this is basically like an 18 or 19-year-old kid who loves Doom and wants to be just like him, but also wants to destroy him. And on the 2 albums that he did as Viktor Vaughn, he only raps, so there's no production at all. He leaves it to other people, and everything's a lot darker and grimier, and it's a lot more urban feeling and kind of really grim sounding.
It's maybe worth mentioning that on Rate Your Music, the second Viktor Vaughn album, Venomous Villain, was voted as the worst Doom album.
Yeah, I didn't even talk. I wouldn't even talk about this. I didn't even take notes on that album. But I think the first one's pretty good.
I actually like Vaudeville Villain. Yeah.
Radon's really cool.
Unhanded, whoever go after burn their hands and lips. A lot of rappers ran and abandoned their whips. It's just another day in the dunya. Don't leave your girl around me, he might sooner. Up under the window, serenade her like a crooner. Stay ahead of the game and cut her off.
It sounds really menacing. It's got this really weird electronic beat and kind of weird blips and bloop to make it sound really menacing and dark. And
yeah, I think that one's produced by Heat Sensor, who I think ended up doing him and RJD2 track on that.
Yeah, Saliva.
Heat Sensor does most of my favourite tracks on that album.
The Saliva R2DJ one, it sounds like DJ Shadow almost. It's really, really cool.
Hell is hot as hell, boss. Tell my horse. He said broads call me Vaughny. I make sure I throws them back if they's too scrawny or bony. Phony MCs use a standing. Leave them hanging like if I ain't know where his hands been. Hussy, how about we bloody up you just for me?
Yeah.
And then, like as Chris said, he did another Viktor Vaughn album, which we won't talk about because it's totally pish.
I mean, that's not. These are not my words. That's just based on some aggregator site. But yeah, it didn't do very well.
It didn't land. It's not even a Spotify, so that tells you what you thought about it. If you like Doom and you have, or if you haven't heard them and you like what you hear in this podcast, definitely worth checking out Vaudeville Villain and Take Me to Your Leader. I think they're pretty solid albums. But after that does come Food, which is actually the album I almost picked.
Yeah, I think we decided not to go for this because, I don't know, I just like the idea of the fact that he's collaborating, which is like a big part of what he does. And I don't know, I mean, we'll talk about Madvillainy, but Food is a fucking great record.
Super. I got this girl and she wants me to duke her. I told her I'll come scoop her around 8, she said Super. That sounds great, shorty girl's a trooper. No matter what I needed to do, she'd be like Super. On his own throne, the boss like King Cooper. On the microphone
so apparently he began planning this particular next MF Doom album directly after Operation Doomsday. So even though he was doing all these other things around about it, he was still thinking about what the genesis of the next MF Doom record would be, and this is it. There's actually not as much rapping on this as there is on his other albums so far. It's a lot more production heavy, and he's got way more VHS sort of recordings from old cartoons, and obviously there's quite a lot about food on it as well. He kind of brings more of a sense of humour to the character.
Yeah, it's kind of, for want of a better word, it's a little bit puerile.
Yeah.
But I did like musically find that this album a bit more engaging, I have to say, and maybe because it was more production focused, and you know, I'm not really It's not really giving anything away to say that I don't get massively hooked by a lot of the vocals on these records, but production wise I could get into this.
You would only want to use the wraps where there's no food associated with the use of the wrap. So some potential uses include wrapping bulk packed in a larger package, and in that case the wrap would actually form into a sauce. When you
the VHS thing doesn't work for me, but in between that there's some really interesting moments. I thought that One Beer and Deep Fried Friends, the two back to back, were both pretty compelling, like really different vibes. So, you know, a nice big open drum sound on One Beer.
Beat up all the MCs and drink them under the table like it's on me. Put it on my tab, kid, however you get there. Foot it, cab it, iron horse it. You leave it on your face, forfeit. Across the mic, hold it like the heat, he might toss it. Told her, tell him they stole it.
I kind of, the Deep Fried Friends thing just had a really kind of party vibe. Like the way it had been assembled was something nice and quite just really accessible about it.
Just so you can feel me like a steel knife. At least so you can see the white of their eyes. Bright with surprise once they finish spitting lies. Associates is your boys, your girls, bitches, niggas, homies. Close, but really don't know me. Mom, dad, comrade, peeps, brothers, sisters, duns, dunnies. Some come around when they need.
So I can actually see why people really connect to that album. As I say, the food thing, although on one hand I appreciate the lightheartedness of it, and it's always refreshing to hear hip hop that's not about fucking bullshit, you know, about braggadocio, but it is maybe a little bit too much in the other direction.
I think it sounds like a really good counterpoint to the three albums he'd put out before. You know, the Vaudeville Villain is really dark and really kind of more grounded in reality, and the King Geedorah one, whilst also being ridiculous because it's about a fucking Godzilla villain, is also quite a grim sounding album. So it's good to get some levity, I think, especially so fucking quickly after those two albums as well.
So there's a sort of elephant in the room for me, and I'm not really sure when is appropriate in the podcast to drop it in, but I feel I should probably just drop it in, and then we can work from it. Because let's be honest, when it comes to the actual album, I don't have a shitload to contribute, because I feel a wee bit like I just watched a movie in Russian with the subtitles off. So I'm going to take the Harvey Dent analogy, right? I'm going to go the Two-Face route again and switch faces, okay? Because on one hand, I found that story about his treatment at the hands of Elektra on the back of his brother's death, about getting dropped, about the impact it had in his life. I found that really compelling, and actually, like I say, I found the Shakespearean qualities of the way he came back as a totally different character, sort of reborn, but reborn in a kind of dark way. I found that really compelling. I found all of these things tied the whole narrative together quite nicely. The whole Doom thing, he wanted revenge on an industry, and I mean quite literally as a human being, not just in an abstract sense or a comedic sense or whatever. He literally was like, these guys fucked me, so I'm going to be a success and I'm going to rub it in their face, and every dollar I get that they don't get, that's a bit of revenge, and every time I fuck them over in some way, which I'm sure we'll touch on, they don't get that, and that's my revenge. I like that. In fact, I really like that aspect of it. Going back to the pin you put in the capitalist communist thing, for me that's indicative of something that people that talk about Doom, or some of the people that I saw talking about Doom, in my humble opinion, seem to get wrong. Like they over-err in what they read into his narrative, because it strikes me that the guy was actually quite grounded. Like, certainly for the kind of humorous nature of some of the lyrics, it strikes me that he's quite a kind of like down-to-earth dude that had some bad things go on, was a talented musician, had some interesting ideas, and made his peace with working outside the mainstream to some extent, even though he's very highly regarded. I mean, obviously when it comes to this kind of music, I struggle to engage with it quite often because of the subject matter, let alone the delivery. But sometimes with the likes of Food, this is why I think it's a good time to drop this in, this sounds to me like the hip-hop equivalent of pop punk, and I think there's too much intellectualising around it, when really that there's something to be said for taking something at face value. The guy sings an entire album really about food and beer and whatever, right? And there's not really any clear signs of deep, particularly involved subtexts in there, and it seems, and when I saw people really spewing forth on the subtleties of this, it's like, I'm not seeing that. It doesn't make me think any less of it. I think the guy actually seems like quite a compelling guy. I don't think we're doing him any favours by trying to pile onto him all these complicated interpretations of his music. I'm like, no, I think the guy just made this record, and this is part of like just his response to being dropped by a major label. What does fuck me off a bit is that when it gets really heavy into the comic book characters, you know, and the VHS clips, it's just annoying. It's just fucking annoying. It's like, this is an adult, and it's just covered in clips of old Hanna-Barbera and Marvel cartoons, and it doesn't work for me at all. Like, instrumentally, I actually quite like it. Like, I'm talking about Food, like the instrumental bits that aren't overlaid by shit samples of stupid old fucking cartoons for kids, they work really well. And I just think there's the problem with artists like this that are this enigmatic, and certainly the problem with artists like this that die and don't leave like a very detailed account of what they were trying to accomplish. They just become like, people sort of impart their own interpretations onto the artist, and it piles and piles and piles up, especially if they're quite revered. I think we're giving Doom way too many layers, and I think like ultimately it's quite light-hearted and tongue-in-cheek. The boy liked to smoke. He was a very talented musician, and he fluctuated between singing kind of unconventional things, doing a bit of kind of fun comic book stuff, and then doing like stuff about food and things like that. That's what really turns me off. Like there's too much of the writer in the articles about him and not enough about him. He's got a compelling story. People don't need to create it for him by adding all these textual layers that don't seem to actually be there. And that, I don't know, that just really fucks me off a wee bit when I'm listening to this. And yeah, lyrically can't get into it. It's just, I'm glad, as I said, I'm glad it doesn't revel in braggadocio. But and as I've hopefully proved over the course of our podcast, I can really engage with hip hop that doesn't need to be Dostoevsky, but it does have to have some sort of like substantive content to it, and it just doesn't have that for me. I can definitely appreciate the production. I really, you know, obviously I had to wrestle a lot of that for the J Dilla stuff, and J Dilla obviously ended up doing stuff with him, and that side of it, yes. The stupidity of some of the subject matter, the annoying nature of a lot of the comic book samples. I mean, this is the hip hop version of pop punk, and if we're casting it as anything other than that, it doesn't mean it's bad, but it's not some giant fucking intellectual achievement. It's pop punk. It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might have misunderstood my comment earlier on, what I was saying.
Oh no, that's sorry, that's not a rebuke to you. I'm just trying to put my feelings out there, because I feel like I don't want to just be of no use. This is the problem with these kind of episodes. I don't want to just be like unrelentingly negative. I'm not trying to be negative, actually. I do quite like the guy, but I just think like it's very difficult for me to get into this for that reason. I really do. When I hear this, I hear a hip-hop equivalent of pop-punk. I hear a light-hearted, fun, well-produced thing, and that is not to say that there's not very good pop-punk bands. We've done entire episodes on that. I just think it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean for it to sound like I was putting forward the argument. I don't think there's any real anti-capitalist vibe to anything that he does. When I brought up that comment earlier on, I was kind of mostly referring to how Dr. Doom as a character is from Latveria, which is seen as being a communist country allegory, you know, dictatorship and Marvel, hence the capitalism communism thing with the Fantastic Four. That's what I was talking about there. I don't actually think Doom is anything like that as an artist. I don't think that subtext exists in his music personally, and honestly I haven't mentioned it anywhere at all in my notes apart from that thing on Dr. Doom himself.
But I think Chris is right in saying that other reviewers and writers quite often over egg the pudding when it comes to finding subtext.
Yeah. That's the phrase, yeah. They really do, and I don't think it does it any favours, because I'm not shitting on it. I'm just saying that when you try and make it into something it's not, it's patronising. Mm-hmm. It's kind of patronising. I mean,
personally, from my perspective, I never really read about MF Doom. He's always just been somebody that I've listened to because I heard about him. He probably got recommended to me back in like 2004 on Pandora or something like that. So I've always just liked him for music's sake. And to me, Food is exactly that. It's a fun album. Maybe part of that is the fact that I don't actually give a shit about lyrics too much.
But you know what, Dave, you'll love this. I'm going to make the first racist comment of the night, okay? But you'll be pleased to know that it's probably anti-white. Mm-hmm. predominantly where I saw this was in the pages, or the digital pages, of your kind of Brooklyn vegan, kind of largely sort of white, middle class, urban, kind of hipster publications. There seemed to be too much of like Guardian writers trying to justify how good Doom was on an intellectual level, instead of just being like, it's good because it's fun. It's good
because he's a fucking amazing rapper, and it's really good tunes.
And it seemed like these writers felt compelled to try and squeeze it into some fucking like hip hop Radiohead category of like a comment.
That's truly that's the pitchfork vortex right there. Is trying to over analyze hip hop. And trying to legitimize it as
it speaks to the kind of dissonance between high art and low art, right? These guys are, and it is predominantly white guys that are writing on these websites.
It absolutely is.
Are basically trying to intellectualize something which is in itself quite intellectual as an exercise. If you think, if you just take it away from being, well, it has to have similar subtext. Well, no, because. And this is actually a really good segue into the next album that he did, because the next fucking album he did after him, Food, was for Adult Swim. And it's a collaboration with fucking Danger Mouse, who was really big at the time. So straight away, if you're trying to intellectualise it as being like this kind of weird pseudo-political bent, you fucked it right away. Because the next thing he did was for Cartoon Network.
But I think we've actually hit on something via this album that is relevant to a lot of our hip-hop discussions, is to not be able to give it inherent value for what it is. You know what I mean?
And I guess that's a sort of cultural and racial dissonance, because you're judging black art through white parameters.
I think just any art. It's like saying that punk rock doesn't matter unless it has some huge social commentary, and some of the punks were just singing bullshit. It was still good. It's like, I mean, there's loads of music in the world that doesn't have any particularly deep meaning. It doesn't devalue it as music, and too often you end up reading the reviews of Doom and just rolling your eyes because somebody has extrapolated it into some giant fucking, like, what's his name, Adam Curtis-esque sort of autopsy of Western society or neoliberalism. You're like, no, it's a fucking fun album. The guy was just a guy that liked making this, and there's enough of a justification in his own personal backstory about revenge and comic book villains. You don't need to find all these other fucking ridiculously superimposed reasons to explain it.
Speaking of being like predominantly white male writers and stuff like that, like the Tanisha Coates article that I spoke about earlier on the New Yorker is called The Mask of Doom. And he intellectualizes Doom in a way which is like makes a lot more sense. He talks about like his legacy, or kind of the way that he sets the music for him as a person, and how hip hop works for that, and how he as a writer tuned out of hip hop when it started to go all sort of gangstery and all that, and he started getting into jazz and neo soul, and a lot of people started to do that. Doom was one of the very few people at the time who thought, I'm going to take them and make that the new kind of hip hop for other people, the alternative hip hop. And it brought people who are sick of it, who were just not really in it for the braggadocio, they kind of come back and go, oh, hang on, somebody's doing something interesting. That in itself is an intellectual gold. Like, you could talk about that all fucking day till the cows come home. You don't need to fucking over-egg it with trying to impose something on it that's not really there. That's maybe not obvious subtext, but there's definitely in his head when he's thinking about making this music.
I mean, certainly as well, I don't want to give the impression that this is an exclusively sort of white on black music phenomenon. I mean, the world is full of music writers trying to write themselves into a job by coming up with fucking bullshit about all kinds of things, and hopefully that's something we're able to actually cut through now and again. It's the one thing I do feel quite at liberty to do here, because we're not looking to make friends, but equally we're not looking to make enemies. We're just trying to actually cut through that, and it is really... Doom is one of the acts where I've noticed that it's most pronounced, where you're listening to it and you're reading it, and there's no real connection with what you're listening to and what you're reading. A lot of the time you're just rolling your eyes going, Jesus fucking Christ, just enjoy yourself.
Totally. I might be one of those writers that also writes himself into a job someday, Chris. So
might Dave right now.
Yeah,
and I definitely was for a while.
You've done it. We're all part of the complex.
This podcast is penance.
It really is. After the album Food, which is the final album released in 2004, he then was asked by Cartoon Network, Adult Swim particularly, on Cartoon Network, if he'd like to do an album with Danger Mouse.
spray. Digest a group and sell the poop on eBay. Danger with the vest screaming, shoot the DJ. Doom clicking over, 2 chickens, 3-way. 4 in the 5, a cork on the freeway. Villain find a way to make them pay whatever we say. State your intentions. I really love your take.
Adult Swim have a fairly respectable track record of working with good bands. I mean, they've worked with a few bands that we've covered.
Yeah, so they've released they've released quite a lot of singles, particularly hip hop, over the course of the past like 10-15 years.
And Electro, I mean, the Blank Mass did one as well.
And metal.
Yeah,
They've done Sleep, Death Heaven.
Yep.
Done a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, this is early. This is way before a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that's also one of the kind of the first real big things that they maybe did.
Yeah, it's just when they were still doing Space Ghost, I think. Actually.
So, am I right in saying, because I mean, I don't know culture. Is Adult Swim like the late night brand of Cartoon Network?
Yeah.
So it's on the same channel, like if you're on number 48, and then it just becomes that. So it's the same.
Is it after 9 PM or something?
Okay.
But it's like they had a really. This is a total back of a napkin sketch of Adult Swim, but they had a really innovative set of shows which actually started out. A lot of them were based around old Hanna-Barbera cartoons that they'd licensed, and this is actually kind of fitting for MF Doom because there was a lot of old superhero stuff in there. But old Hanna-Barbera cartoons like Birdman, Space Ghost, they had C-Lab, they had some Scooby-Doo stuff, they had rights to some of that, and what they did was they kind of took a lot of the animations and they sort of recut it. It's almost like audio sampling. They would like sample the cartoons and then insert them into completely different narratives. So in Space Ghost, it became Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and they took the guy and turned him into like a talk show host, and they would bring on Metallica or Moby or Sonic Youth or whatever, and they would stage an interview where they'd ask a question that probably wasn't the question that Space Ghost asked, and then the person would answer. I think Bjork actually did one, and then they would give like a crazy answer, and the thing would go off the rails. It was really good. Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, was good. C-Lab 2021 was really good, which I only just realised is actually now. And yeah, they had a really innovative line in programming in the early days, which then kind of grew. They got like Metalocalypse and all those kind of things in, didn't they? And what else did they have? They had
movies. That was one of the first shows. That was great. Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Yeah. They had some comedy stuff. Who's that guy that was like alt-right that had a comedy show for a while on Adult Swim, and they had to kind of disavow him? He did like a cop character in it.
We talked about him on a Nexus. In a Nexus, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I can't remember the guy's name. They had a lot of like edgy stuff. Eric Andre, I think, did some stuff on there as well.
The show's still on it, is it not?
Is it? Right.
Fucking mental, by the way.
There you go. Anyway, so it's like a really eclectic comedy channel. It's actually, I think, like, even though a lot of it's animated, it's really, really quite funny at times. It's kind of quite grown up, and it is literally like an adult version of Cartoon Network, but they kind of expanded the brand and sort of embraced the kind of audiences it was attracting. A lot of stoners, let's be honest. I was heavily into Adult Swim at my peak smoking time, and it was fucking brilliant for that. So they got into like music that those people connected with, and I think it's no coincidence that the likes of MF Doom, who like to smoke, a lot of these acts were really keen. Sleep, who had Sleep are just made of weed, so it makes sense, and there's kind of brand consistency there, and they've kind of taken that forward, and they've actually done some pretty cool stuff. There's some really good distinct individual singles that have been released through their singles project on Adult Swim.
Yeah, so this album kind of came about when Adult Swim asked them to do something together. They'd actually worked together on a song called November Has Come on the Gorillaz' second album, Demon Days. It's actually a really good song.
Like a spigot. My guess is yes, you can. Like, can I kick it wicked? Lick a shot if you happy and you know it.
One of the very few good Gorillaz songs. And yeah, they collaborate together, call themselves Danger Doom, and the album's called The Mouse and the Mask. It has lots of samples from Adult Swim cartoons in it, including quite a lot of Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Straps loose, diagnosis, shell shock from totem toast. He still can hear the bells rock. Doc, another loading dose. He claimed he couldn't take the racket. Faked his own escape in an 8-ball straight jacket.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this animal here,
also
which is totally in line with his stuff anyway, because he was already sampling loads of cartoons into it.
Yeah, and then also the cast actually appeared to do brand new voice bits on a lot of these things as well, which is very, very cool. Including hearing some of Aqua Teen Hunger Force rapping, which is a bit funny, I think. This is a funny record, right? I think this is quite a fun listen, this album.
I can't really imagine the Meatball rapping. Am I going to have to find that and cut it in?
Which one is the Meatball?
The Meatball.
Can't remember.
I mean, the Meatball's the Meatball.
Somebody with the weirdest voice raps.
We need food. What are you doing there? I'm rapping. Yeah. No, I see that. What for? Money. That, I want to get some steady bitches and hoes. That's a kid for me.
Yeah, it's like
yeah. he does an MF Doom rap from Food at the end of one of the songs. It's quite funny. So basically, it was an album backed by Cartoon Network, as we said. Danger Mouse on production, and Doom is just the MC, no production for him. It's actually kind of batshit crazy to think about this now, as being like the way it came together and all the weird samples and all the weird cast that are on it. But it's really charming and really affable and quite comic. I mean, around about the same time, obviously Madvillain happened as well, and this is a much different kettle of fish from that. It's really absurd, it's really goofy. There's some great guests on it as well. Ghostface Killer's on it. He does it fucking great. He's one of the best songs on it, actually, The Mask. And then CeeLo Green's on it, but he does this really kind of low-key backing vocal on a song called Benzie Box.
Don't worry, believe me, you'll get busy when it comes to poetry. He's got plenty, la la la.
If you didn't know he was on it, if you didn't know it was him that was on it, you would never know that it was his vocal. And then there's a sort of recut of one of the songs from Food, which is the one I'm talking about, called Space Hose. It has Space Ghost on it. That's quite funny as well. It's a total romp of an album. It's just so much fun, and it's dead short as well. It's only it's only 40 minutes long.
Like it is fun. It's interesting that it's kind of a commission, but it's done with a lot of heart. And like, I mean, I really like Danger Mouse's stuff. The production is great. That's one thing I get, like, just throughout MF Doom's stuff, is like, yeah, there's anger there, but he never takes himself too seriously. A lot of his stuff is just about having a bit of fun, and I mean, this is just all about having fun, but it works.
Mm-hmm. So after this album, he slows down quite considerably after this record. He does a couple of collaborations before his next solo album. One which I really like, actually, is he appears on the Grind Date, which is the De La Soul album. There's a song with them called Rock Cocaine Flow, and its flow just fits in, man. I mean, I can't believe it taken him that long to work with them, because they were clearly an influence on him.
Been on in the game as long as he can really swing. Turn the corner spinning, bust that ass and get up. Dust off the mask, whoever laugh, give him a head up. He got jumped, it pumped his adrenaline. He said it made him tougher than a bump of raw medicine to write.
But this has actually got quite nice early 2000s production. It doesn't really sound that old school compared to some of the other stuff that Doom had kind of been on. And he slots in so well. The song is a total banger, and it's quite low key, but it's a total head bop. Really enjoyed that. And he also appears on GTA Chinatown Wars soundtrack with Ghostface Killer, doing a song called Chinatown Wars. I think Ghostface Killer's a pretty good rapper on individual songs. I don't know if I can stomach a whole album of his stuff. I know he's a great friend of yours, Chris. But
I have pulled his half-eaten chicken wings out the back of a couch, so yeah, we're pretty close.
It actually has a proper chorus to that song, that Chinatown War song, which a lot of Doom songs do not have, and it really, really works for me. He actually collaborated with him on an EP as well, called Doomstarks. So I say an EP, it was a single called Doomstarks, and they were actually due to collaborate together, but it just never seemed to happen, despite the fact they were quite close friends and had worked together on various things over the years. They never managed to do a full album. And then he comes back in 2009 with Born Like This.
A folder and his grip on a boulder bolster, they supposed to know. It's show in his aura glow. Get from out the road when he get dough, it's horrible. Time is money, spend, wait, save, invest, a fest. The 10K, a cave, a chicken chest, S. Yes, y'all a double, get your trickles. The best ball is...
He drops the MF because it's too formal and just calls himself Doom. Same character though. Dave, I know you like this album, so I'm going to let you talk about it for a little bit.
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, I really liked this record when it came out. this was maybe like the first MF Doom record that I actually got into, and I haven't listened to it for a long time until like this last couple of weeks, and we've been catching up on him, and oh god, it's not as good as I remember.
It's not a good album.
I think I was swung by Gazillionaire because I absolutely love that track.
It's a fucking banger. That's probably the best song on it.
Yeah, and I mean that's J Dilla production as well, and it's not a terrible record, but it's top heavy. By the time you're getting on to track 11, like track 12, Microwave Mayo and stuff like that, there's just nothing really happening.
Mayonnaise, eat it up, microphone, microwave, mayonnaise. His own way was strange, but it matters not. Tuned into a frequency tone that shattered rock. Hold it down like Shatner do Spock. Rapper jocks need to put a sock in a chatterbox.
I just found myself, like I was walking just on my, daily government allowed walk, listening to this record, and I just kept zoning out. I think like sonically it's the one that's most similar to Madvillainy, and I just, in my head, I always had it as a proper follow-up to it, but it just doesn't have the same vibe to it. And I guess we've talked, like, he is a rapper that isn't into hooks, and that's part of what he does, but there's having no hooks, and then there's just being quite boring, and this record is just quite boring.
There's maybe an argument to strike a balance there. Yeah, like I said, in at least one of the aficionado lists of his back catalogue that I read, this was bang last out of all of his records. Regardless of the collab with J Dilla, they said that just as an album, it just doesn't work. It doesn't get any of the magic.
Well, it's got another version of Lightworks on it, which is a song that's on Donuts that he did with J Dilla.
Lost a few to stew beef, new referees. What a remarkable team. Show your teeth.
It's not as good as J Dilla's version, but it's still a good song. A song called Angels with Ghostface Killah, who we've just mentioned, is also on it.
Angel Shallon's finest, though it happened in the streets of Brooklyn. Plus I played the whip real low, cause my face was wolf and my angels jetted out of Albee Square. Gun out, rapping their head, kinda crowded, so they clapped in the air. Chasing nigga down block for block, squeezing Glocks. These mommies real anxious to blow.
Is that a cover of Robbie Williams?
No.
Because suddenly I'm interested.
It's got a totally old school hip hop feel, like old Wu-Tang. And it's got a Mr. T sample, which is quite funny. But it's also got one of the most homophobic songs I've ever heard, and they're called Batty Boys.
Yeah, but
that's interesting.
Is that homophobic?
He's
or is he? Yeah, exactly. He's talking about homophobia, but I mean that's one that you could get entangled in trying to understand.
Layers of irony.
Yeah, exactly.
He's calling Batman and Robin and Aquaman gay and all that, so it's like, well, that's kind of on brand for a villainous comic book character, I suppose. But yeah, after that he kind of tails off. So we're gonna draw a line underneath this for this week, and I know we're dropping another 2-parter on you fine folks, but hey, fuck it, we think this warrants it. So come back for part 2 of Doom.
We'll talk about his later career, the album that we're actually talking about, and then of course Nexus time.
What I lack in hip hop knowledge, I've made up for in a beast of a Nexus this week.
I've also got a fairly sizable Nexus, so yeah.
I've actually got 2, and they're both quite short. So,
well, there you go.
Classic.
See you next week.